I never wanted to tell this story. Believe me, I've tried, time and again, to bury it deep inside, to drown it in distractions, to silence the whispers of those memories. But every night, without fail, I wake up to the same nightmare. A dark forest road, the damp air thick with tension, desperate cries in the distance, and the cold, unnerving realization that nobody ever found out the truth, no matter how hard we tried. This is the story of my best friend, Michael Larkin. What happened to him on that autumn night in 2018 remains a mystery, one that has haunted me for years. It's a mystery that has cast a long shadow over my life, leaving me with more questions than answers, and a gnawing sense of dread that something vital slipped through our fingers that night. But let me take you back to the beginning. Let me walk you through the events as I experienced them. Perhaps by the end, you'll see something I missed, or maybe you'll have your own theories about what happened to Michael. Because even now, I'm still searching for the truth. The setup. It was autumn 2018, one of those rare seasons when the leaves were golden, the air was crisp but not cold, and the sun seemed reluctant to give way to the winter. Michael and I were both students at the same university. We'd been friends since high school, closer than brothers, really. He was the quiet type, introspective and thoughtful, always with his nose in a book, and yet, there was something magnetic about him. He didn't seek attention, but people were drawn to him nonetheless. Michael was the kind of guy who was reliable to a fault. If he said he'd be somewhere, he was there. If he promised something, he followed through. So when he didn't come home after a late night at the library, I wasn't immediately alarmed. Studying late wasn't unusual for him. He was always pushing himself, always striving to understand more, to dig deeper into whatever subject had caught his interest. But then came the morning when he didn't show up for class. Then the afternoon when nobody had heard from him. Calls to his phone went straight to voicemail. His parents hadn't seen him. By the evening, panic began to settle in. We called the police. We retraced his steps. His last known location? The university library, where he had been working on a research project. But from there, Michael vanished, without a trace. The police launched an investigation. At first, they thought maybe he had taken off, run away, or maybe he was in some kind of trouble that he hadn't told anyone about. But as the days passed and no new information surfaced, it became clear that something far more sinister might have happened. The investigation begins. As his best friend, I was questioned extensively by the police. They wanted to know if Michael had been acting strange, if he had been stressed, or if he had said anything that could indicate he was planning to disappear. But there was nothing. No strange behavior, no cryptic messages, no signs of distress. Michael had been his usual self, calm, focused, and determined to finish his research. The police scoured the university campus, questioned students and professors, and searched the nearby woods where Michael often went to clear his head. It was a densely wooded area just outside the city, a place he liked to hike and think in solitude. But those woods, once a peaceful escape for him, would soon become the epicenter of our worst fears. 3 days after his disappearance, a group of search volunteers found Michael's backpack deep within the woods. It was torn and dirty, as if it had been dragged through the underbrush. Inside, his books were intact, along with his notebook and phone. The phone was dead, but there were no obvious signs of foul play. No blood, no damage to the items inside. But that only deepened the mystery. Why had Michael's backpack ended up in the woods? Had he gone there willingly? Or had someone taken him there against his will? The discovery of the backpack reignited the search efforts, and for days, the woods were combed thoroughly. Drones were deployed, search dogs brought in, but there was nothing else. No trace of Michael. No clues as to what had happened to him. It was as if he had simply vanished into thin air. The haunting silence. Weeks turned into months, and Michael's case grew cold. The police had no new leads, no suspects, and no clear motive. His disappearance was filed away as an unsolved case, and though it remained open, the intensity of the search efforts dwindled. For most people, life moved on. But for me, the silence was unbearable. I couldn't let it go. I couldn't accept that Michael had just disappeared without a trace. There had to be something we were missing, some clue hidden in plain sight. So I began my own investigation. I pored over Michael's notebooks, reread old messages, spoke with his professors, and retraced his steps in the days leading up to his disappearance. That's when I found something strange. Among Michael's belongings was a notebook, one I hadn't seen before. It was filled with notes from his research project, but interspersed between the academic scribblings were strange sequences of numbers and letters. At first glance, they appeared to be random, meaningless even, but there was something deliberate about them, something that made me think they were more than just idle doodles. I showed the notebook to a friend of mine who had a background in cryptography. He studied the sequences for days before coming back to me with a chilling discovery. The numbers weren't random at all. They were coordinates. The coordinates pointed to a location just outside the city, a remote, abandoned warehouse that had once been used as a shipping facility but had fallen into disrepair years ago. The building was isolated, surrounded by dense woods and far from any main roads. It wasn't the kind of place anyone would go voluntarily, especially not at night. But the coordinates were clear, and I couldn't ignore the possibility that this place held the answers to Michael's disappearance. I knew I couldn't go there alone. I needed backup, someone I could trust. So I called on my friend, Daniel, who had been following the case closely since the beginning. Together, we drove to the location late one evening, just as the sun was beginning to set. The warehouse was as ominous as I had imagined. Its windows were broken, the walls covered in graffiti, and the surrounding area overgrown with weeds. The building had an eerie, abandoned feel, as if it hadn't been touched in years. But as we approached, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. We entered through a side door, the hinges creaking loudly in the otherwise silent night. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. Old crates and rusted machinery littered the floor, and the faint smell of mold filled the air. But as we moved deeper into the building, we found something that sent a chill down my spine. In the center of the warehouse, hidden beneath a pile of old tarps, was a suitcase. And inside that suitcase were documents, photographs, and something that made my heart skip a beat. One of Michael's notebooks. A dark discovery. The notebook was filled with notes, but these weren't the kind of academic scribbles I had seen before. These were detailed observations, surveillance notes, diagrams of locations around the city, and lists of names. Names I didn't recognize. There were also photographs, grainy and out of focus, but enough to make out familiar faces. Some were of people Michael and I had known from the university, students, professors. Others were strangers. But what was most disturbing were the diagrams. They appeared to be maps of the city, with certain locations marked with red XS. I recognized some of the locations: government buildings, corporate offices, even a police station. What was Michael doing with these? Was he investigating something? And if so, what had he uncovered that made him a target? I flipped through the pages, my mind racing with possibilities. Could Michael have stumbled upon something he wasn't supposed to? Something dangerous? That's when I saw it, a final entry in the notebook, written in Michael's familiar handwriting. It was a short, cryptic message that chilled me to the bone. They're watching. I know too much. The anonymous letter. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was indeed watching. I started noticing strange things. Cars parked outside my apartment for hours, people I didn't recognize lingering near my building. And then, one morning, I received an anonymous letter. Inside was a single sentence, "Stay out of it, or you'll end up like him." That was enough to send me spiraling into paranoia. Who was behind Michael's disappearance? Was it the people in the photographs? Was it some kind of organized group? And what exactly had Michael uncovered? The police, when I showed them the notebook and the letter, were skeptical. They chalked it up to a prank, told me to be careful, but ultimately, they didn't see any connection to Michael's case. But I knew better. There was something going on, something far bigger than anyone realized. And Michael had been caught in the middle of it. The deeper conspiracy. Over the next few months, I became obsessed with finding out the truth. I started following the people from the photographs, tracking their movements, trying to understand what Michael had discovered. What I found was disturbing. These people, students, professors, even some city officials, were all connected in ways that weren't immediately obvious. They attended the same events, frequented the same locations, and communicated through obscure, encrypted channels. It became clear that Michael had uncovered a conspiracy, a web of corruption that stretched deep into the city's institutions. He had found evidence of illegal dealings, blackmail, and possibly even murder, and he had paid the ultimate price for it. I began compiling my own evidence, gathering everything I could to expose the truth. But the deeper I dug, the more dangerous things became. The anonymous threats continued, and I knew I was running out of time. If I didn't act soon, I might end up just like Michael. The final confrontation. In early 2020, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I arranged a meeting with one of the people I had been tracking, a professor at the university who I believed was deeply involved in the conspiracy. I confronted him with the evidence I had gathered, hoping to force a confession or at least get some answers. But instead, I was met with a cold, calculated response. The professor didn't deny his involvement. In fact, he seemed almost amused by my efforts. "You don't know what you're dealing with," he said. "Michael didn't either. That's why he's gone." He refused to say anything more, but his words were enough to confirm my worst fears. Michael had indeed uncovered something dangerous, something that had cost him his life. The unanswered questions. Even now, after everything I've uncovered, I still don't know the full truth. Michael's body was never found, and his disappearance remains officially unsolved. The conspiracy he had uncovered is still active, operating in the shadows, beyond the reach of the law, and I'm left with more questions than answers. What exactly did Michael discover? Who was behind his disappearance? And why haven't the authorities done more to investigate the people involved? Perhaps I'll never know. But one thing is certain. Michael's disappearance was no accident. He was silenced, and I'm determined to make sure his story is told. Epilogue. The last clue. Several months after the confrontation with the professor, something unexpected arrived in the mail. It was a small package, no return address, no markings of any kind. Inside was a flash drive. At first, I hesitated to plug it into my computer. Who had sent it? And why? But the curiosity got the better of me. As I opened the files, I found a trove of information, documents, emails, recordings. It was everything Michael had been investigating, and more. Detailed logs of secret meetings, financial records of bribes, and a list of names. Names of powerful people in the city who were involved in the conspiracy. But the most chilling file was a video. It was grainy, shot in the dim light of what looked like a basement or underground facility. The camera panned slowly, showing a figure tied to a chair, barely conscious. My heart stopped as I recognized him. It was Michael. The video ended abruptly, with no sound, no explanation, but it was enough to confirm what I had feared all along. Michael had been taken, held against his will, and possibly tortured. But where? And by whom? I turned the video over to the police, but so far, there have been no developments. The case remains open, but it feels like we're no closer to finding the truth. Now, I turn to you. What would you do if you were in my place? Could there be a clue I overlooked? Have I missed something obvious? Let me know in the comments if you have any theories or insights. I'll be forever grateful for your help, and maybe, just maybe, together we can uncover the truth. Thank you for listening. I apologize if there are any mistakes in this text, as it was generated by artificial intelligence. If you notice any errors or inconsistencies, please point them out. I'll take your feedback into account for future stories.